Scientific research at the University of Southern California is being conducted on a grand scale to generate discoveries that will change society. One office at USC, the Office of Research and Innovation, is responsible for overseeing and supporting research and innovation across the university. One man, Dr. Ishwar Puri, known as Ish, leads this office. Ish has made it his mission to get to know each of these scientists personally and to understand their work. He accomplishes this by simply having conversations over coffee. These conversations have become known as Coffee with Ish.
Possible we wouldn't be sitting here today. You'd be having coffee with someone else.
Correct. I agree, but I love having coffee with you anyway. So. The first thing I tell people about me is that I am not neurotypical because I grew up with a severe speech impediment, and it shaped my life to some extent. I've spent a long journey in various ways, always focusing on development because I think that you understand systems better when you can watch them being built or build them yourself.
My aspiration was to become a musician, and that's the first kind of career path that I took. Going deeper into that, I realized that's more of a passion. Came across a course on brain and language, and for me, music was language. I had an advisor who was open-minded enough, allowing me to investigate brains of musicians compared to non-musicians, that when I came to USC, I wanted to look at and see what happens in childhood.
I'm a filmmaker. I had a personal interest in the subject because one of my grandchildren is on the spectrum. My motivation for doing this was when I saw my daughter and son-in-law grapple with this problem, recognizing that their son might be on the spectrum and trying to find good, reliable information about this.
Being a musician gives you a certain level of comfort with uncertainty and being flexible with things. And I think that kind of applies to life, at least for me, in that sense. In science, you don't know, like you start an experiment and things go different than you expected.
With your work, when you talk about development, you do a series of experiments. You know, there's a big emphasis today that if you do something, it should be reproducible.
For me, it was all about understanding variation and heterogeneity. In some ways, understanding why two individuals, even who are genetically identical, so they share identical genomes, why is it that they turn out, differently? And it turns out that there are a number of things that are occurring. One is, how they adapt to the experiences and environment. Environment is critically important in driving development. There's some wonderful studies in psychology where they've looked at children who are highly stress reactive, like they have, a trigger stress response. And they are always viewed as children who would have real struggles and real problems in the classroom. So it turns out that if they're in an environment in which there's a lot of social support for them, they're the ones who flourish. They're the ones who exceed expectations. They're the ones who are incredibly creative. Same child, what's changed? Not their genome, their environment has changed.
The Agency for Health Research and Quality in Washington was interested in disseminating a study they did about the best evidence-based treatments for autism. And we applied, with the help of Steve Molden, we applied for a grant. AHRQ's mission was to show the best evidence-based treatments. It was so much better to see these treatments in action. Our intention was understanding autism, treating autism, and living with autism.
We started working with the Dan Marino Foundation. They said, okay, we have an issue with young adults. They're on the high end of the autism spectrum, and oftentimes they're brilliant, they're talented, they can work, they can do jobs, but they choke on the psychosocial interaction in a job interview. they're terrified, so we want to build something that helps them to get through a job interview. So we created a variety of virtual humans, and we could make each of these job interviewers at 3 different levels of provocativeness. So the nice interviewer, the neutral one, and the cranky one. And what it showed was that this is a difficult to engage population, and it's awkward to do live role play practice interviews, but they engage with the virtual humans. They weren't as threatened.
So I did this large and at the time a little bit crazy study of recruiting 75 children and wanting to follow them for 5 years. Over time, I got to observe how this place provided a space of safety for them and their family, a place of feeling belonged to. And as they became better and better musicians, how much they found their voice, their agency, how they found a way of responding to stressors in their life. Because again, they're from a community that there are a lot of stresses in their life, from socioeconomically, but also family circumstances. So the music program provided a lot of scaffolding, I like to say, to equip them. So it seems that the music really gave them more than just becoming musicians.
Why do some people have an X factor or a superpower, and everybody has a different superpower? What happens there?
I've interviewed an 8-year-old, who's a concert violinist, who was playing, and at the time she had played in Carnegie Hall and she had played with the New York Philharmonic at 8 years old. Not only the capability of playing at that level at the age of 8, but also having the emotional control.
When you're a musician, you follow measure by measure, and then you have to go back, and then you start again. When one plays music, there's this coupling of the auditory and motor networks of the brain that they have to communicate with each other. Not only those 2 systems, but the emotional system of the brain, the attention system of the brain really makes a difference, especially in development, in early development.
The brain is really set up to have optimal periods in which experience is going to drive development. And I always use the example of language. If you look at the population, when do we introduce second languages in the United States? Junior high school and high school. It's a complete waste of money. And I've said that to policymakers in talks that I've given, and everyone's like, oh, you mean we shouldn't learn a second language? No, you should. We should just shift it to like preschool. Development is the foundation for everything that comes later.
Part of the treatment and part of the message that we wanted to send was early diagnosis and treatment. And early intervention makes a great deal of difference. We were very pleased with the results of the studies that we did. Increased sense of hopefulness for parents, especially with newly diagnosed children.
It was the highest privilege of my life to have their parents trust me to bring their child to USC, participate in a neuroimaging study. But really, they also understood the value that if we want to make a change in the community, and we need to have evidence.
There is truth in science. I would say that we talked about at the very beginning when I said, I had a severe speech impediment when I was a child. That shaped somehow my feeling that I was different, but I wasn't a bad individual. And there are many people who we interacted with on a daily basis who are different. I talk about this, about how you treat others and how you perceive others, and that differences, back to heterogeneity in biology, differences are okay. Mm-hmm. It's okay that somebody is not the same as you.